A war for gold, a war for money, and a war for souls. A war on terror, a war on drugs, a war on kindness, a war on hugs, a war on birds, and a war on bees. They got a war on hippies.
Hi, I'm Liz Reese, and welcome to Voices of Resistance. Today's show, I have one of my most favorite guests and someone whom I admire very, very much, Ann Wright. Ann Wright, thank you so much for being here. For people who don't know Ann Wright, and I'm assuming most of the Olela watchers do, Ann Wright served for 29 years in the U.S. Army and Army Reserves and retired as a colonel. She was a U.S. diplomat for 16 years. She resigned in March 2003, right on, Ann, in opposition to the war on Iraq. Always great to have you back in Hawaii. The first thing I wanted to ask Ann was, it's been over 10 years since you resigned in protest to the war in Iraq, and for those 10 years, you have been traveling around the globe, speaking out against war, for peace, and opposing the crimes being committed by the U.S. government. And I was, thinking a little bit about, wow, here she had this life in the military and the State Department for a very long time, and now for 10 years you've, been this very outspoken, outrageous, and very admirable activist. So I wanted to first ask you, does your life in the military and the State Department seem like a lifetime ago? And how do those two compare?
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me back again. It's a pleasure to be back on Olelo and Voices of Resistance. And it is a different lifestyle for sure that I have of now working on challenging U.S. government policies rather than implementing them as I did for most of my life. And it certainly was a change. I'm very comfortable now in my my new role, although now it's a decade old, of really questioning how the various administrations that we've had, from the George Bush administration into the Obama administration, how they are handling U.S. foreign policy, how they're handling threats to the United States, how they are handling issues of incarceration, of imprisonment, of Guantanamo, of torture, of eavesdropping, of drones, of targeted assassinations. So I feel like I am serving hopefully a valuable function of being a person who's been in the government and who is now willing to challenge it.
Awesome. Well, I can just tell you for myself, you are a huge inspiration. As an activist, I've mentioned many times on Voices of Resistance, you sometimes feel very alone and disconnected from globally what's happening around the world. And every time you're back here, it, kind of revives me and puts new life in me and makes me feel even more connected to the global struggle of working for justice and peace. So thank you, Ann. I have one more question for you. Recently, you and myself included were out protesting in Kailua where Obama was staying on vacation. And I, of course, think it's the right thing to do. But I wanted you to comment because I have a few even close friends and other people I know, and you hear it every time Obama's on vacation. Can't you just give him a break? He's on vacation. Why do you have to protest when he's on vacation trying to get away from all that? So what's your response?
Well,
can't we give Obama a break?
Well, we as citizens have responsibilities too, as well as the president. And the president had plenty of time during each one of those 24-hour day cycles that he was here to get some rest and relaxation. And the few minutes to hours that he had to think about the signs that we held, and actually it was seconds that he saw those. It wasn't like we were in his face all the time. If we caught him, it was going out and coming back in for a grand total of probably 10 seconds. And hopefully within those 10 seconds, one of the signs on whatever issue it was that was out there, because not only were the issues of Guantanamo still being open, the issues of eavesdropping, the issues of U.S. bases all over the world. There were also people there on labeling of GMO products, something that he promised to do before he became president and yet has not pushed for that. Also, the pivot toward Asia and the Pacific and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. all of these things that are very important that we need as citizens of Hawaii. It's our responsibility to say if we are concerned about these things. Now, there were other signs that were there. There was one lady from Connecticut on her last day that she was there who wanted to come out and hold her sign saying, "Thank you for the Affordable Health Care Act." And so she was there. And interestingly enough, that was the one sign that was left out there for one full week. No other sign made it through 1 week. I think that the Obama administration guys came out and probably helped it every day to have that little sign there for something that's positive, and I agree with that. It's positive. I'm glad we're having an attempt at health care. I just wish it had gone a little more smoothly, and that some of the premiums are not. Some of them are going up, and that's a worry. So it is our responsibility to be out there.
I agree. And one of my responses to people I know who, why do you even have to protest while he's on vacation, was I simply say, well, the people who have been tortured in Guantanamo for 12 years don't even get a vacation and don't get to leave. And people being killed by drones don't get the chance to, have a vacay in Hawaii. So I think it's important to be out there. One more thing I wanted to ask you about recently, with your numerous articles that you've written, and I encourage people to check out Anne's articles if you haven't read them. If you simply Google Anne Wright, you will get a huge amount of really amazing articles full of information. A recent article you wrote was entitled 12 Years a Slave versus 12 Years a Prisoner in Guantanamo. And that was, of course, a takeoff of the movie 12 Years a Slave, which has gotten, all these reviews and being talked about all the time. And I just thought it was right on that you hit it home and said, okay, here's this 12 years a slave, but let's talk about now 12 years a prisoner in Guantanamo. So I just wanted you to briefly talk about that article.
Sure. Well, I saw the movie here in Hawaii and was stunned as I was watching it of the parallels of that movie and to what happened to the people that ended up in Guantanamo. The way they got there, of being sold, of bounties being put on them as bounties for slave traders. They were looking for freed Africans who were living in the north, and they would kidnap them and then send them down to plantations in the south. They were paid for, just as the bounty program, which put nearly 75% of the people that are in Guantanamo were paid for by the United States. And as we see by the rates of the people who have now been sent out from Guantanamo, the majority of them, there never were any charges placed against them because there was no reason they should have ever been picked up. But the whole issue of keeping people imprisoned and the type of punishment and torture that happened on slave plantations and that have happened to the people in Guantanamo and other prisons that the United States has, and the way that finally the person in 12 Years a Slave was able to get out of there because of the goodness of a person who looked at the plight of this person and said, you are being illegally detained here on a plantation, just as we have defense lawyers from all over the world who have been defending people that have been in Guantanamo and finally getting them out. Right now there are 158 left in Guantanamo out of 779. And of that 158, 57 are cleared for release. 57 are cleared. So they shouldn't even be there. But the Obama administration has been very slow in finding places for them to go. Although within the last 2 months, they have been able to get, I think it's 8 people out. But still, all of these people who have already been cleared for release, and yet they're still 12 years later in Guantanamo.
And didn't the Obama administration recently say something to the effect, I want to say it was about 45 of those prisoners that were cleared, even though they've been cleared, that they will never, ever be released? Or
actually, those 45 have not been cleared. Those 45 have been designated as people who the U.S. feels it has evidence against them of crimes against U.S. national interest, but they got it in a manner, they got the evidence in a manner that they can never tell the American public how they got it, so they can't put them on trial, because the torture that they used, or the illegal methods that they used to either get them there or to the information they have on them would never withstand an evidentiary test in the courts. So the way to get out of that is, well, we'll never put them before the courts. Wow. We'll incarcerate them for the rest of their lives. And never have a court hearing on their future. Which, for America, I mean, this is just pure old, like Middle Ages dungeon stuff. Stick a person in there until they die. Don't even, in no court process, nothing. Just because the executive of our country says we're going to do it.
That's what I really appreciated about your article comparing the movie, because, most people, while they're very moved watching this movie, have this notion that this is something that is long in the past and doesn't happen anymore, when in fact our government is committing these same crimes right now today. So thank you for that article. I really appreciate it and thought it was really important to get that message out.
Thank you.
Now, I'm always amazed at all your travels, and I think I was saying recently to someone, I can't imagine her passport. Like, she must have so many, because how do you keep all those stamps in there? So I know you have been traveling a huge amount during 2013. If you can briefly tell us some of the places you've been, and then I know you have a slideshow and are going to get more in depth about some of the specifics of those travels.
Well, from the end of 2012 and then through all of 2013, it has really been quite a year for international travel, starting with at the end of 2012 going to Pakistan on a trip to highlight the fact that not all Americans agree with the U.S. Targeted assassinations in Pakistan, and that we recognize the problems that it's causing for the United States. Not that it's resolving problems, that it's causing problems. And then from Pakistan to Gaza, that was right after the Israeli 8-day attack on Gaza. And then from Gaza to Afghanistan, and then from Afghanistan to Hawaii for a little time in the warmth in January, and then taking a trip to England to be a part of a whistleblower group where we actually met with Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy. Then back to Hawaii, then to Ireland for a 7-day speaking tour all around Ireland, and then another trip to Europe to be with the International Peace Bureau for its semi-annual meeting, and then to Northern Ireland to be with the Nobel Women Peace laureates, 120 women that had been invited by 6 of the Nobel women to meet and discuss demilitarization. And then from there in May to Yemen to talk with victims of drone strikes and also families of people who are still in Guantanamo, and also to some of the people who had been released from Guantanamo. Then in the fall, I have been to Northeast Asia on a trip to Jeju Island, to Japan, to Taiwan, and then into China. And I think we'll be talking about that a little bit later. So the bottom line is that 2013 was an incredible year for being able to travel around the world and talk about the issues that rise when because of U.S. foreign policies and military policies.
They have all these very outrageous, kind of ridiculous reality shows on TV that are very popular. And I think there should be a reality show, following you around, all these international travels, connecting with all these people worldwide. And somebody should do that reality show, because that would be awesome.
Well, I feel very, very lucky that I've been able to go to all these places and hopefully have some impact on people that are in the areas, and also when I come back home to have impact on people in the United States and telling stories of people in regions around the world and what is happening to them because of U.S. policies. Many of these travels are documented through little short YouTube, so they're kind of out there.
That is
but
true, yeah.
I think it'd probably wear a film team out.
Yeah, they might not be able to keep up with you. So now I think we're going to jump to a slideshow that you have.
Well, as I mentioned, starting at the end of last year, going to Pakistan and then Afghanistan, and then in 2013 into Yemen to talk about drones. That's been one of the issues that a lot of organizations have really been discussing in terms of the assassinations, the weaponized drones, the assassinations that are being conducted in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, and our concerns about them. And so right here in Hawaii, we have an issue that's happening now with Hawaii being chosen as one of the test sites, along with Oregon and Alaska, as a trifecta, so to speak, of the testing of drones to see how to integrate drones in commercial airspace. This is not supposed to be about weaponized drones and military drones, but drones that are used on a commercial basis, and to see if indeed they can be integrated into our commercial airspace along with passenger airliners that we fly on.
And of course the police and sheriffs and all of them want to use them
Yes, the law
too.
enforcement aspect of them. And we know that Paakaloa is designated as one of the places in Hawaii that they want to be testing these, as well as Barking Sands over on Kauai. And I would suspect here on Oahu that we will find that there's some testing going on. So this is one aspect of the drone thing that will be coming right here to Hawaii. On the international level, though, we have drone summits, and in fact, in November of 2013, at the Georgetown Law School, about 6 organizations sponsored a global conference on drones. And it was a very important conference. Over 400 people from around the world were a part of it, including delegates from Yemen, from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, and who are being affected directly by these drones, and also people from Great Britain, from France, from Germany, from Norway. And as a part of this, we invited 3 people from Yemen whom we had met when we were in Yemen in May to come to this conference. We actually invited more, but the State Department did not give visas to all the people that we had invited. But 3 of them came. And here's a photograph of when we were in Yemen in May and had a demonstration out in front of the U.S. Embassy about the drones that are killing, to include just recently in Yemen, a wedding party, similar to what happened in Afghanistan in 2000, I think it was 5. 80 people were killed in Afghanistan, 26 people, I believe it was, have been killed in Yemen in just one drone attack.
I think that's such an important aspect because, while people can be out there, and they should be out there, opposing drones and talking about the number of civilians and innocent people that are killed, when you hear these people speak out, people who have seen their family members and their loved ones, have literally witnessed them being blown apart and people wounded and dying from drones, and these people speak, it is so powerful and so moving, and these people rarely have a chance for their voice to be heard. It's kind of unfathomable to me, like how people could not be speaking out against this when you hear these people with their stories.
Well, that's right. And we brought 3 people from Yemen, and this photograph here, the woman on the left, Intisar, she spoke about in her province, Marib province, how that drones, American drones, are being used instead of capturing, even trying to capture people. They're being used actually to go after people that the Yemen government would like to have out of the way, not necessarily anybody that has done anything toward the United States, but that the Yemen government would like to get rid of. And she told harrowing stories about people who had been imprisoned, had been turned loose, were reporting back in as they were supposed to the government once a month, and as they were leaving the government areas, going back to their home, the drones would get them then. It was, rather than
Wow.
if the government really wanted to capture them, they could have done it, but no, they go ahead and kill them. And from her village to get into the capital of Sana'a, there are 35 checkpoints, and she was saying there are plenty of ways to catch people, but that's not what America wants to do, nor the government of Yemen. It's easier to kill them than capture them. And then
Which
I'll
was
just-
an article that I also encourage people. You wrote an article about this, and the article was entitled, "In Yemen, most Al-Qaeda can be captured, but killing is easier." And you spoke about that at great length.
Yeah, and then at the front page of the New York Times, one of the people that we had that came with us, Faisal bin al-Jabr, five members of his family were killed with a drone. One of them was an imam who had been preaching against what Al-Qaeda was doing, the force that Al-Qaeda was using. Because most people in Yemen don't like Al-Qaeda, and they would just assume Al-Qaeda would get out of there. And in fact, they have been pushing Al-Qaeda out. But the imam that was a part of his family, who had been telling the neighborhood, we need to get these guys out of here, he was targeted and he was killed, along with 3 other people. And his story, as he told it to many members of the U.S. Congress, it was the group called, it's in England, and it's been doing a lot of work on both drones and on Guantanamo. They set up a series of congressional visits for Faisal that really, really did impact, I think, members of our Congress. And then this article that came out on the front page of the New York Times about the questions on drone strikes and finding only silence. That indeed the administration has been silent about why his family was targeted. But his demeanor, he's an engineer, he's a very well-educated guy, and really can explain very, very well what's going on in Yemen, and it really struck a lot of heart chords while he was here.
Are people fearful to speak out? Because I showed on Voices of Resistance a few months ago Glenn Greenwald's movie, The Unmanned America's Drone Wars. And it talked about a young boy who I believe was about 16 at the time and went to one of these conferences and spoke out and told his story about his cousin being killed by drones and other people he knew. And connected with many people in the international movement against drones.
Yes.
And shortly thereafter, he was killed and assassinated by a drone.
That's right. 3 days later, that was in Pakistan in 2011, and it was just
Outrageous.
unbelievable, outrageous. So speaking out does come with its hazards. It certainly does. And in fact, one of the people that we had invited to come to this conference, who attended a conference with us last year, is a Pakistani lawyer who helped put together that conference in Pakistan that young boy had come to and given his testimony about what had happened to his family. And the lawyer, Shahzad Akbar, was not given a visa this year, that he has been too outspoken about his total opposition to U.S. assassin drones. So the U.S. government refused to give him a visa again.
But people still speak out.
But they are speaking out, yeah. They feel it's their obligation, that their voices have to be heard, and it's our obligation to try to get them here so that people within our Congress can hear them. We did get one meeting with one State Department official for this delegation, and the woman that was one of the 2 Yemen desk officers listened, but without comment. So we can only hope that she really took to heart what they were saying. But whether she herself will be able to convince the higher-ups in the State Department and then higher and higher and higher that there should be a change in government policy, I kind of doubt.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, from the drones, I wanted to go into a recent trip that I took to Northeast Asia, and that was in October and November. I went to Jeju Island in South Korea. I'd been there about 3 years before in solidarity with citizen activists there who at the time were trying to prevent the initial construction of a naval base that will house Aegis missile destroyers that are part of the U.S. missile defense system. And the South Korean government had decided to put this naval base in a pristine area on the island of Jeju. And the citizen activism on Jeju Island was incredible 3 years ago. And
I remember when you came back from that trip and, you know, the stories about the people and their courageousness of these women who were defiant and speaking out. And that was actually the very first time I ever learned about what was happening on Jeju and their struggle and plight. And the photo that you have now shows, you know, unfortunately, this huge amount of construction being done for this naval base.
That's right.
Which people have been opposing for, what, over 7 years now?
Yeah. And despite huge citizen activism, now you see on this slide the huge buildings that have been now built inside the wall, the breakwater that's been built out far, far into the ocean. Essentially, the base is being built. There's no doubt about that. Despite huge citizen activism, the government of South Korea has gone ahead and has built this. But it doesn't mean that the activism ends. Every day at noon, there's a blockade in front of the main gate, and you can see the truck coming right behind us that were seated there. And then every day, here come the police, and the police carry the people away, and here's me getting carried away.
There she goes again.
There she goes again. And as they brought in their international police team to talk to this international that was there, and after my first, they had to carry me out of there, they said, if we have to carry you out again, we'll take you to the airport and deport you. And I didn't want to be deported. All the rest of the people who were in line, all of the priests and everybody else said, oh, come back, you can bring your chair back, sit here, but all you have to do is when they come over to pick you up, just get up and walk away. And so that's what we did for the rest of the hour or so that we were there. But what it does is it slows down the construction. And so every single day, there at 7 in the morning, there are people that are blocking one gate and doing 100 bows. Then at noon, there's a blockade of the main gate. And then at noon, there's also a mass. And every single day, there are hundreds of people that come out to this construction site to let the government know that they still disagree with that base being put there. And if you think about the destruction of that pristine maritime area and all of the beautiful things that were underwater that are now just crushed, and then the spiritual rock of that Jeju Island is so famous for, the Gurumbi rock, now just being concreted over. It's a real travesty.
Oh. Yeah. And I was really amazed, you know, first learning about Jeju, the role of the priests and, you know, these very defiant priests that have been beaten on a regular basis and been jailed how many times, and you know, many of the activists there, some still in jail.
There are 6 that are still in jail.
Very brutalized by the police.
Yeah, 2 of them I've been in for over 250 days. And the government is, you know, kind of throwing the book at them for their continued opposition. None of it has been a violent opposition. It's all nonviolent. But they're putting them away for long periods of time. The Catholic Church, you've got to hand it to them. They have some very tough priests and nuns who are willing to be out there day in and day out and to really be the spearhead to show that there is opposition. And there are plane loads of people that come down from the mainland to help out on various times. And then there are internationals that show up. Oliver Stone was there in August, and that was quite a boost to the morale that he was there with his history of reporting on historical things around the world. And his wife is Korean, and so she encouraged him to come to Jeju Island, and it was very, very helpful for them.
Good.
Yeah.
And some of these people have been doing this nonstop for 7 years.
7 years. The people that
Every
live
day
there,
out there.
yeah. The women that work in the fields and the men that work in the fields, and they, at lunchtime, they'll come down and help, and then it's been a long struggle for them, and to have people come in to offer solidarity from around the world is really helpful to their motivation and their solidarity. Yeah.
And I was asking you earlier, how close is the naval base to completion?
Well, it's hard to tell. We really couldn't get a good view into it, but I would say it's within a year and a half of being totally finished. And the big giant piers that will be able to hold cruise ships even, they're going to bring cruise ships in to this multi-use port, as well as the destroyers.
So sick. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just torn up the whole area. It has. Well, as this trip to Northeast Asia, I went to Japan and was a part of a 10,000 person conference on the Japanese Constitution, and particularly Article 9, which is their no war part of their Constitution. Wouldn't that be nice if we had a no war part of our Constitution? It's really quite amazing when you see 10,000 people in the Osaka, Japan conference center that are there for an all-day event to talk about the Abe, Prime Minister Abe of Japan's latest attack on the Constitution. The Bush administration and the Obama administrations both have encouraged Prime Minister Abe in his 2 terms as Prime Minister to undercut the Article 9 so that the United States would have more partners in its wars of choice. The United States want Japan not to be a self-defense force, but to be an aggressive military force. And yet the people of Japan, who have Article 9 committees in every little village and every little hamlet, they kind of like the last 68 years of not going to war. And they say, we like this no war stuff, and we don't want our military involved in these wars of aggression. So there's a real battle going on right now where the people are saying to the Abe government, we do not want to be a part of America's wars. And the Abe government, kind of like the British government, you know, under Tony Blair. Abe reminds me a lot of Tony Blair. He wants to be, you know, one of the boys on the team, on the war team, and that's what he's really pushing for. So being there with all of these Japanese activists who are working every single day to try to push back the move for nationalism and the move for the patriotic Japan, and you know, we have to defend ourselves, and to defend ourselves we have to go after other people. It was a pleasure to be there with them, and with groups such as Code Pink Japan that I've worked with several different times. And
I didn't know there was a Code Pink Japan.
yeah, it's a small but mighty group that carries on the tradition of Code
That's
Pink
awesome.
in the other parts of the world. Yes. And then the next part of my trip was through the Peace Boat. This is a really remarkable boat. As you can see, it's a cruise ship. And it is a Japanese-sponsored boat that cruises the world, 2 around-the-world trips every single year, taking people to places of interest and taking them on trips once they get to ports of call that will show them what's happening in the countries. And I had been invited after the Article 9 conference to go on the Voyage of Friendship, which was a 10-day trip that brought together 500 Japanese and 500 South Koreans.
Wow.
The ship will hold 1,000 passengers, and because of the anti-Korean attitudes in some parts of Japan right now, they wanted to, the organizers of the Peace Boat wanted to bring Japanese and Koreans together so that they could have a chance to meet on this boat and talk about these issues. And so this was a cruise through Northeast Asia that I was invited to be on. And we went to Busan in South Korea, we went to Keelung in Taiwan, we went to Okinawa. We got as far as the port in Okinawa, but because of the third typhoon that I had been a part of in that time that I'd been in Asia, the port in Okinawa closed on us, and they said, your boat's too big to be in port, you'll break down all of our piers and docks, and you have to go on, get out to sea because you'll tear up our dock. But we already had on board people from Okinawa who had been talking about U.S. bases that are on Okinawa. And so the Japanese and Koreans were already very knowledgeable about it. But before, well, and the fourth place that we went was Shanghai. And as I mentioned, in each place we had programs. And in South Korea, when we went there, I went on one of the trips that was to see what their nuclear power program was all about. And it turns out they have a very large program. Right now they're building up. They want to have something like 30 nuclear power plants eventually. Right now they have in one area right on the ocean, as you can see, it looks a lot like Fukushima. Here you have nuclear power plants that are right on the water. And there are 4 of them that are in operation right now, 4 more that are about to go online, and then 4 more that are in the planning stages. So in one area of South Korea, right along the ocean, are going to be 12 nuclear power plants. And should there ever be a tsunami there or any sort of disaster, this whole thing would just...
make Fukushima look like nothing.
Yeah. So we had on board people that were opposing the continued construction of these nuclear power plants, and they were telling us that one of the power plants that's been in operation for quite a long period of time here is just rife with problems. It needs to be closed down. It's too old. It's old technology, and it's very problematic. So we got a big earful about these power plants in Korea.
Now, was it mainly students and young people on this boat?
There were some, but most of them were adults. The composition of most of the cruises are older people that can afford to book in on a ship. But then they do have programs for students. So they do have scholarship programs, and they want to bring students on board, but the financial base that keeps the boat afloat, so to speak, is by recruiting retired people who have time and money on their hands.
When you had first mentioned the Peace Boat, it took me a little while to register, but it brought me way back to, even before APEC. I believe it was 2001 when the ADB, Asian Development Bank, came to Hawaii, and the Peace Boat came as part of that, grouping opposing the Asian Development Bank and with the activists. And I vaguely remember it was a lot of students at that time on the boat. And we did a whole program here at McCoy Pavilion, and the Peace Boat, docked and people got off, and it was just a really awesome sight. And they had this whole dance and puppets and all these things really protesting the Asian Development Bank.
Yes.
So even from 2001, I remember the impact
Oh, that's wonderful.
that they had, and it was really, really cool.
Yeah. Well, at that time, I was working on the Asian Development Bank, being on the other side, so to speak. And I don't even remember hearing that a Peace Boat was in town. It's really interesting. But the Peace Boat is coming back, and I've got a slide a little bit later that will show it's coming back in June and also in July. So we want to encourage everyone to hopefully they'll have an open house at one of those times so people can go on board. But certainly during the time that the passengers are here, they'll be spread out all over the island, doing various, seeing various social justice issues and Hawaiian cultural things, and so there'll be 1,000 people that'll be out meandering around, and
Wow.
we want to encourage people to say hello to them and be a part of all of this.
Definitely.
Yeah. So the Peace Boat is really something that we can be a part of too. We can book on shorter parts of the voyage if you can't go on the 2.5 month around the world, which would be great. But there are parts of it, and I'll get to it in just
Okay.
a minute. I just wanted to mention that for once, here is a peace boat that was bigger than a war boat. This was a photo from
Yeah.
Taiwan.
That's awesome.
And the little boat right
Looking
below,
down on the warship.
and the one behind shows smaller warships. Certainly there are other warships that are as big as this cruise ship, but for once, here was a big peace boat, a sign that big, that was bigger than these war boats. Wrong direction. Let's see. One of the other places, as I mentioned, we went to Okinawa, didn't get into it because of the typhoon, but one of the places we were going was to Hanoko, where the U.S. military, and just this last, a week and a half ago, the governor of Okinawa changed his mind and has given approval for for filling in lands again in the pristine area of the ocean, of the South China Sea. And right up in here we can see the 2 runways that are going to be coming across into the pristine areas, which are the home grounds of the dugong, a marine mammal.
What was the justification? Because it's supposedly not in a populated area?
Well, that's right. There is a marine base in the middle of Okinawa that the citizens of Okinawa suburbs have grown up around it, Futenba. And it's a dangerous place. There have been air crashes, people killed, Okinawans that have been killed by these American air crashes, and a lot of citizen activism there saying, you've got to move this base. It should not be in this overpopulated area now.
And the huge amount of rape and sexual assault on the population
that's right.
by military.
The U.S. military has a sordid record of sexual assault and rape of Okinawan women and children. So that also has been the impetus to try to get the U.S. military to move military out. The 75% of the U.S. bases in Japan are located just on this tiny one island. Less than 2% of the island, of the land base of Japan is holding 75% of the American bases, and the Okinawans are tired of it. So there's a lot of citizen activism going on there to try to move the Marines out, some of whom will come to Guam and some to Hawaii, as it now transpires. The next stop was in China. The trip from actually Okinawa and then into Shanghai was very, very interesting. I've never seen so many boats in my life. Fishing boats galore. I mean, the fishing areas around Taiwan, the disputed islands that are disputed by China, Japan, Taiwan, you can see, I mean, there are fishing boats galore there. And we did have fishermen that were on board our peace boat that were telling us about what was happening. They said, actually, we already had agreements among all of the fishermen about who got to fish where. We were doing fine until all of these military boats from both of these countries started coming into our territory. We can handle the fishing rights, but the governments are interfering with us. But when you're out in those waters, boy, you can see that, where the largest populations in the world are going after fish. Then as we got into the Yangtze River Delta, going up into the Yangtze River to up to Shanghai, oh my gosh, on each side of the river were these huge, huge container complexes, container ship complexes. And of course they have to be there because, you know, China closed the world. Our clothes, everything comes from China, and they have to move it out of there by these great containers that you see coming into Hawaii and other places. And mile upon mile upon mile of nothing but container shipping facilities, and then these big ships coming out into the river. As we were going up the river, they were coming down. I happened to go up on the bridge of our boat at this time, and the captain was just about to have a heart attack. I mean, all of these boats just coming in all directions.
Wow.
But then as you got into Shanghai, and you know, here's one of the great cities of the world, and once the old city on one side of the river, and then Pudong, the new city, on the other side. And as our ship was backed into the dock, here we were with the new skyscrapers of the new side of Shanghai, with all of their light shows going on. I mean, it is it's a remarkable city, a remarkable place. And one of the other remarkable things are the transportation networks that are being created in China, the largest transportation networks in the world, to include the bullet train, which we have here on the screen now. The Japanese who came on our trip from Shanghai to Nanjing to go to the Nanjing Massacre Museum, we went on this 200-kilometer trip on the Chinese bullet train. And the Japanese, who of course have had bullet trains forever, they were very interested in, look at this, wow, this is a new little device. They were very impressed with the Chinese bullet trains. And then we went to Nanjing, and if you remember, back in 1937, over 300,000 people were killed in a 6-week period, killed by the Japanese Imperial Army. And the rape of Nanjing, you know, one of the famous books of the women that were being raped by the Japanese soldiers. And there's a remarkable museum that's there in Nanjing. It's 2 city blocks long, and it's very graphic. And we had 100 Japanese who wanted to go to that museum to make their apologies to the Chinese people. And it was really such a moving time to be with them as they went through the museum.
Wow. And
you know, saw what their military had done. And there is within Japanese historians right now, and rewriting history, and the challenging, were there really 300,000 killed, or was it 70,000, or was it this or that? No matter what the number was, it was a huge number, and the brutality of what was done was the 100 Japanese wanted to go to make their apologies, and in a very moving ceremony, the lady on the left, 87 years old, her family had been killed by the Japanese, and she was telling about what had happened and then what happened afterwards. And then the lady on the right is from South Korea. She had been on our boat for the last 6 days, and she was one of the what you call comfort women. One of the thousands of women throughout Asia that were forced by the Japanese military to be sex slaves. And so she had been on board to talk about what had happened to the Japanese. And so she had come with the Japanese delegation, and one of the most moving things of this whole trip was when the lady from Nanjing and then the South Korean lady met, and both had been brutalized by the Japanese army. And yet they were there to work for peace. And it was a very, very moving time.
Yeah,
Very
I can only
moving.
imagine. I've seen, a small amount of pictures of the images of the museum, and those alone were very powerful.
Oh, they are. And this, one of the last things you see in that museum is on the ground level, after you've gone through fields of bronze hands that are sticking up from a gravel, or a head that's sticking up.
Yeah, I've seen those images.
They're just so powerful. And then at the very end of it is peace. And here with the American pivot toward Asia and the Pacific, and the kind of the drum beats that we hear again and again about Japanese or Chinese militarism, and the need to confront China and all of this. And on the governmental level, that's what the governments are. They're picking at each other, poking at each other, prodding, instigating things, I think. And yet on the human level, the people who have seen what wars do, they don't want any more of this. The Chinese people don't want the wars. The Japanese people don't want wars. And I would say the American people don't want wars. So our mission is to make sure our governments don't want these wars.
I'd like to read just a short paragraph from an article that you wrote. I believe the article was entitled Jeju Island, Tragic Destruction of Pristine Marine Area for Another Naval Base for the U.S. Missile Defense System. And it's a longer article, so people can, read it in its entirety, but I thought this was a really important paragraph. The lessons of Jeju Island are stark. The U.S. military pivot to Asia and the Pacific will be disastrous for many areas. Bases in Okinawa, where the U.S. wants to build a runway into the South China Sea over pristine corals, home to the dugong manatee in Pagan, an island in the northern Marianas where the U.S. wants to use as a bombing range, as it did for decades on the Hawaiian island of Kaho'olawe and the Puerto Rican island of Vieques, and in Guam, where the Marines want to have an artillery range and an environmentally protected area. With the pivot, the United States has increased its military exercise in the area. Current American military exercises with South Korea and Japan have triggered the North Korean government to put its military on alert and warned that these exercises could have disastrous consequences. China is upset about U.S.-Philippines military exercise in the South China Sea. The Japanese people are angry that the U.S. is urging the government of Japan to renounce the no-war article of their constitution, so the U.S. will have another financial ally in wars of choice. So far, just as the U.S. pivot to the Middle East 12 years ago destabilized the region, the U.S. pivot to Asia seems to already be having the same dangerous effect.
Well,
I thought that was really powerful.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think if you really look at what's happening, that we are having a destabilizing effect on that area, and the U.S. Continually poking at China. Not that no nation is perfect, but there are ways to work within an international environment where you can hopefully encourage behaviors without threatening people. Although that doesn't seem to be the American style, that threats are kind of what we use. And that's why I think it's so important that we continue to have an interaction among the citizens, the people that are the most affected by all of this. And we're going on trips to Asia, and then going on places like this peace boat to bring together people from all over the world that'll be on a boat to talk issues out between the Japanese and the Koreans, and going on an around the world cruise where you'll see sites from of other countries that are involved in social justice issues. And we do have 2 times in the next 6 months that the Peace Boat will be coming through Hawaii.
So that's 2 different times people can go down and hook up with the Peace Boat. And
yes, and you can travel on parts of the trip if you can't go the whole way. For example, on this westbound trip that will be coming through here in June, you could get on that in South America or Central America and then come across through some of the Pacific islands before it comes up to Hawaii, and then goes on its final leg to Japan. So you could go on that, or wait, and when it comes back on its eastbound journey a month later, hop on here in Honolulu and then go, I think it's El Salvador, Nicaragua, and then through the Panama Canal, and then into the Caribbean, and then into Europe. If you go to peaceboat.org, they have scales of, well, you actually have, if you're not going to take an around-the-world trip, then you have to email them and give them the length of schedule that you would like to be on it, and then they can tell you how much it'll cost. But these are the things that are so important for us to be aware of, that there are opportunities for us to get out there and see the world and do things that will help expose us to things that are happening around our globe, and to be really more global citizens than we are.
And connected to the world.
Yes.
So should I ask what's on the itinerary for 2014?
Well, next week I'll be heading to Geneva, Switzerland, and I will be going there as a part of the trying to get women to the Syrian peace table, Syrian women to the Syrian peace table for the peace talks that hopefully will happen on January 20th and 21st. And
Wow.
We've been pushing very, very hard at the UN and at the 6 parties to allow women, allow women to be at the peace table. You know, here it is, over 50% of the people of every country are women, and very seldom are they ever included in peace talks. So I'll be going there, and then later on in the springtime I'll be in Norway for an international conference, and things will just keep happening, I'm sure. So it'll be a busy year, no doubt.
Well, Ann, thank you so much. You know, like I said over and over, and I can't say enough, you know, every time you're back in Hawaii and to hear your stories and your travels as an activist here, you know, it just assures me all the time that, you know, how important it is to speak out for justice and to continue to speak out for people who don't have a voice, and to speak about my government and the crimes that are being committed against humanity. And you're always an inspiration and a dear friend.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. And thank you for watching Voices of Resistance.
Yay!